like in the medium of the video essay, persona is sort of a version of tone, like the writer's voice.
Persona can be incredibly disconnected from your actual person. At that point, it becomes character. But I think there's definitely a gradient between the ineffable, authentic self and a character that is entirely disconnected from ourselves.
When I get nervous, say something relatable. I'm hella relatable. That's hella legit and not really debatable.
Almost 5 years ago, I made a video about a difficult question. When does a YouTube video become art? Unsurprisingly, I wasn't able to answer that question straightforwardly, but I did put forward some ideas. One suggestion I made was that maybe one thing that much YouTube art often shares is that it will blur the line between art and something else that online video is often used for: communication. Here's a clip from towards the end of that video. It seems to me that this potential uneasiness about how exactly it's addressing us could be a recurrent feature of YouTube art. Art that's native to and only makes sense on YouTube. This feeling it can give us that exists in the blurred boundaries between communication and art, public rhetoric and aesthetic expression. If that's true, then it seems bound to continue to give rise to further debate and ever more difficult and interesting questions. Another way I could have put this would be to say that YouTube art can often blur the line between fiction and non-fiction. Think of the faux vlogs of Lonely Girl 15, the mockumentary horror of Marble Hornets, the review show / science fiction epic Atop the Fourth Wall, or Poppy's influencer-tinged performance art.
I look at myself as I apply the makeup.
It would definitely be too simplistic to say that all artistic uses of YouTube will toy with the distinction between fiction and non-fiction, but it does happen often enough to be worth exploring. In this video, I want to think about the relationship between YouTube and a particular genre of art that specializes in blurring the fiction-non-fiction boundary: autofiction. I actually made a video essay recently with my colleague Tom Hemingway that used autofiction to think about Bo Burnham's Inside.
Autofiction. Narratives which identify as fiction to a greater or lesser extent, despite the central character or narrator bearing the name of the author.
Robert's been a little depressed.
However, it's a concept that's far more often associated with literature. Particularly fashionable throughout the 2000s and 2010s, literary autofiction has recently been attracting critical backlash. In this video though, I'm less interested in defending autofiction than simply in asking, could it be a useful concept for understanding certain things that are happening on YouTube? Coined in 1977 by the French novelist and theorist Serge Dubrovsky, the term autofiction has been applied to a wide variety of literary works, from self-defined autofictions like Véronique Tarjot's Far From My Father, via apparent novels like Rachel Cusk's Outline trilogy, or quote autobiographical novels like Knausgaard's My Struggle series. As a word, autofiction obviously combines autobiography and fiction. But as for what kind of category it refers to, one definition I find usefully broad is this: autofiction combines the conventions of autobiography with those of fictional writing, and presents the author as both herself and a fictional character, encouraging confusion between fiction and autobiographical fact. So if autofiction combines the conventions of autobiography and fictional writing, what are the conventions of autobiography and fiction? This is too large an issue for a short video essay to answer, but we could do far worse than invoke Kendall Walton's influential premise. We conventionally assume, Walton argues, that the contents of fictional narratives asked to be imagined, whereas those of non-fictional narratives asked to be believed. So this would mean that autofiction seeks to complicate the stability of these conventional assumptions, especially an author's implied relationship to someone represented in the work, most often its protagonist. It actually seems extraordinary to me that autofiction and YouTube have seldom been discussed together by scholars of either subject. I say this partly because of two related assumptions about the performance of the self so often associated with YouTube. On the one hand, there's a deep-seated assumption that the majority of YouTubers' online persona constitute, quote, non-fictional self-presentations perceived by an audience as authentic. This is said to reflect the general ideology of authenticity supposedly governing YouTube performance and reception in general. It's definitely unsurprising that assumptions like this exist, given the sorts of discourses that have long been associated with YouTube, not least the site's infamous initial slogan, "Broadcast yourself." Yet, at the same time, what gets emphasized equally frequently is that the clearly performative and mediated nature of YouTubers' self-performances necessarily results only in a faked authenticity. Scholarship often places great emphasis on observations like, quote, authenticity on YouTube does not refer to a reflection of reality without mediation, or claims that YouTubers' self-performances can only create at best an authenticity effect. This assumption is equally unsurprising. Authenticity may be the most persistently and gleefully debunked concept in media studies, and YouTube scholars were unlikely to prove an exception. Taken together, these assumptions about authentic performance and its impossibility seem to lend themselves perfectly to autofiction as one concept that might help explain at least some of what's happening on the platform, but so far this doesn't seem to have been considered. Maybe that's because, despite scholars' deep skepticism about the potential for genuine authenticity on the platform, what they seem always to assume is this, that YouTubers' self-performances invariably aim to create the appearance of non-fiction. However, this assumption seems to me, at the very least, questionable. There have always been YouTubers whose performance style just can't be accounted for in the slightest by this understanding of the platform's so-called ideology of authenticity. And I'm not just talking about quasi-hoaxes like Lonely Girl 15. Since YouTube's earliest days, many popular YouTubers have regularly performed as explicitly fictional characters, say Fred,
Hey, it's Fred!
Filthy Frank, or Lena Morris's overly attached girlfriend. Other YouTube performances have depended on blurring the lines between fictional and non-fictional selves, like Nostalgia Critic or Angry Video Game Nerd, or between pointedly exaggerated personas and characters, like Dax Flame, Copper Cab, or Mimi Molly. Between these and many other kinds of YouTube performance, there seems a lot of room for approaches that could reasonably be defined as autofictional. And I suspect that autofiction can probably be found across many different YouTube genres, from vlogs to feature-length filmmaking. However, today I'm going to focus on one genre in particular, the YouTube video essay. In theory, seemingly non-fictional and informative, the YouTube video essay is a genre that's in recent years become increasingly aesthetically ambitious, especially amongst an informal grouping of explicitly left-wing video essayists, sometimes dubbed LeftTube by its fans. In particular, I'll be looking at the works of one YouTube video essayist who's been a key figure in these developments, Natalie Wynn, creator of the channel ContraPoints. Wynn's ContraPoints videos have become popular both for their witty philosophical analyses of online cultural politics and their unique aesthetic, a comic, highly stylized, irreverently trans-queer combination of direct-address monologues, dragball performance styles, baroque art direction, and, sometimes, explicitly fictional characters. These characters include figures like Freya the Fascist, Nazi caricature of the alt-right.
She calls me a Nazi, and yet she's the one trying to silence my free speech.
The brilliantly named trans-exclusionary feminist Abigail Cockbane.
This, Your Honor, is peak trans.
And Tiffany Tumbles, a Trump-loving, self-hating trans influencer.
Make traps gay again.
All characters featured on the channel are embodied by Wynn herself, and she tends to write for them heated comic debates about topics like the politics of gender or religion. Given this partly fictionalized dimension of her YouTube work, it's probably unsurprising that, when discussing her videos, Wynn occasionally explicitly defines them against YouTube's reputation for authenticity.
The way I make videos, it in some ways it's like very against the entire ethos of the internet generation, right? And it like is not the kind of authenticity that people associate with YouTube.
Here she is speaking at a creators conference, outlining something of her approach.
I use a very strong persona. That's a kind of fictional character that I play on the internet. People want to see what they feel is a real person. But there's more than one way to be authentic. You don't have to be a diarist. You can also be a novelist, metaphorically speaking. So it's possible to express yourself through lying, or you can be yourself by becoming someone else.
It seems obvious that a YouTuber who conceives of her work in this way might be ripe for discussion in relation to the mode of autofiction.
It's points again. Same queen, new look, try to keep up.
Be yourself by becoming someone else. Unsurprisingly, I do want to argue that at least some of Wynn's work is indeed best appreciated as autofictional. However, I also don't want to fall into the trap of claiming that every video by her, or any YouTuber, is usefully definable as autofiction. So, to make my case, I want to contrast two of Wynn's ContraPoints videos. 2019's Transtrenders
I just can't with these trenders anymore. I simply cannot.
and 2020's Shame.
How do I put this delicately? Your humble hostess is a total les. Shame.
These videos both see Wynn embodying someone coming out as gay. Coming out videos have become a distinctive YouTube form of personal confession as rhetorical action. Despite both of these videos featuring Wynn apparently confessing her identity as a lesbian, I think only one of them, Shame, actually has the rhetorical force of a coming out video. That's because only Shame, and not Transtrenders, sees Wynn confessing this identity in a non-fictional mode. So, as we've seen, Wynn has said that she always uses
A very strong persona. That's a kind of fictional character that I play on the internet.
However, whereas in some videos Wynn performs as characters defined explicitly as fictional,
Ich heiße nicht mehr Fritz. Nenn mich jetzt Freya.
like Freya the Fascist or Abigail Cockbane, in many others Wynn isn't playing explicitly fictional characters. Her channel features numerous videos like this, including her most recent, Twilight. Videos like these, which always feature a good deal of artifice and theatricality, nonetheless primarily focus on Wynn delivering a direct address monologue to camera as, seemingly, herself. A regular occurrence, sometimes she even introduces herself by name.
Hi, I'm Natalie Wynn, biological woman.
Before going on to discuss specific incidents from her life, which viewers are clearly invited to understand as genuine. And by this, I simply mean non-fictional claims about her non-fictional self. However performatively those claims may be articulated, which is often very performatively indeed. One video Wynn has made using this mode is Shame, which I claim is her actual, which again is merely to say non-fictional, announcement of her sexuality to her audience. A 42-minute video essay, Shame sees Wynn analyse topics like transgender self-loathing, internalized homophobia, and compulsory heterosexuality. It's also, as Wynn immediately sardonically acknowledges, an example of that conventionally non-fiction genre, the coming out video.
You're probably worried this is a coming out video, and I'm sorry to tell you that it is, but it's so much worse than just that. You know, 1, coming out may be regarded as a misfortune. 2, looks like carelessness. And 3, well, at that point, you're just doing it for attention. And I do love attention, I want to be very clear about that, but I also happen to be gay.
Following this, Wynn proceeds to offer a direct address monologue structured around her own personal narrative of shamefully repressing, wrestling with, then belatedly embracing her identity as a trans lesbian, prompted, we're told, by having fallen in love with her closest female friend. Shame creates a deeply performative, ironic, and stylized context for Wynn's confession.
I'm starting in the middle of things. I'm like an epic poet. Hail Muse. Can we get some melodramatic music, please? Yeah, here we go. You're gonna want to pour yourself a glass of something nice. I want you to fully enjoy my pain.
It takes place across more than one carefully constructed set, expressively dressed and lit. It also consistently prominently foregrounds thematically relevant props and mise-en-scène. The statue of a biblical Eve that stands behind Wynne, for instance, attempting to hide her face and nakedness with her arms. Later, a second set depicts another flagrantly metaphorical backdrop, this time overflowing with tumbling flowers and greenery, evoking something like a pre-Raphaelite Eden. Likewise, there are Wynne's decisions about costuming. Lurching between extremes of funeral-like modesty and Eve-inspired nakedness, her dress too is aesthetically reinforcing the video's central theme of shame. So persistently and self-consciously employing symbolism, thematic metaphor, satire, all these stylistic gestures are plainly intended to be understood as being performative, and quite flamboyantly so. Yet, despite all this stylization, and despite Wynne personally wanting to regard videos like Shame as depicting
The kind of fictional character that I play on the internet.
the concept of fiction, not even autofiction, ultimately seems unsuited here. Thinking back to Walton's idea that non-fiction narratives ask to be believed, the most fundamental thing we seem asked to believe by videos like Shame, even before considering anything about the content of Wynne's monologue, is something about this mode of address itself. We simply seem asked to believe that the YouTuber who's apparently addressing us as themselves is doing precisely that. Importantly, this doesn't require believing that a YouTube performer is somehow not performing, merely that this represents one familiar kind of performance, non-fictional performance of the self, with all the complexities that this implies. The fact that Shame is an especially stylized instance of this kind of performance doesn't prevent it from encouraging that kind of belief. And that belief is bound to be crucial to how we watch and relate to Wynne in the video. It's likely to be very important, for instance, at moments like this, when she momentarily struggles to hold back tears while describing her last serious relationship with a man which she had to end after coming to terms with her sexuality.
He was never ashamed to be seen with me or of his friends and family knowing he was dating me, which, if you're a trans woman, that's a huge deal. He was a lot less ashamed of me than I am of myself. And when I was with him, I wasn't ashamed. And that meant a lot. So I really wanted this to work. Like, if I was going to be with a man, he was the one.
Now, I'm not saying that this poignant balance of self-protective irony and deep emotional vulnerability couldn't be moving if we thought it was fictional, something that Wynne was asking us merely to imagine. What I am saying is that it's certainly moving in very different ways when it's something that we know we're being asked not only to imagine, but to believe. And most fundamentally, of course, this non-fictional invitation to believe means that the main subject of this video is given the rhetorical weight necessary for it to be a true coming out video, a genuine announcement of Wynne's identity to her audience. By contrast, in Transtrenders, which was released 7 months prior, at the moment Wynne comes out, she's playing an ostensibly fictional character called Justine. Transtrenders is one of ContraPoints' most fully fictional videos, as it were, at least in terms of its visual language. In particular, it features no moments of Wynne speaking to camera as herself in the manner of Shame. Instead, it's populated purely by named fictional characters who are filmed largely in shot-reverse shot dialogue sequences. So in this way, it aesthetically frames its contents as fictional, as something inviting our imagination rather than belief. So given this, the fact that Wynne's character comes out in this video seems to have been neither conceived nor received as a coming out by Wynne herself, the video's author. And this is despite the fact of who Wynne is playing when she comes out here, Justine. Justine is a character who Wynne has embodied in several prior videos, and it's long been an accepted fact amongst ContraPoints fans that Justine has always been the character that feels closest to the author. Nevertheless, the fact that she is conceptualized as a character, not the author herself, remains important. In Transtrenders, which is a narratively complex video, Wynne plays not just Justine, but also Justine's frenemy, Tiffany, and a quasi-diegetic host character called the Digital Messiah, all-knowing commentator with a godlike perspective on the action.
For it is I, the digital messiah, the online oracle, the social media savior, yay!
Who serves as a kind of Greek chorus, interjecting occasionally to comment on the video's fictional events. The moment of Justine's coming out involves all these characters. It's prompted by Tiffany, confirmed by the digital messiah, then finally owned up to by Justine.
Justine, you're not non-binary, you're gay. And everyone can see this except you. Oh, come on. I'm not gay. Justine was extremely gay. Protest though the lady may, there simply is no stopping gayness. Okay, so I'm a little bit gay, right? And you don't know how to reconcile your attraction to women with your desire to perform your gender. That's why you feel this dissonance. Yeah. I guess that's basically it. Well, it really shouldn't be that hard, girl. You already came out as a woman, just blurt it out.
In the later video, Shame, Wynn goes on to lay out, in a non-fictional mode, a fairly precise timeline for her realization that she was gay, structured around her coming to recognize that she wasn't in love with the man she was dating and that she'd fallen in love with her best friend.
So this nonsense went on until the beginning of last year, and then two things happened.
According to that timeline, Transtrenders was certainly made after she came to that realization. So, in retrospect, it seems to represent an opportunity to flirt with the idea of a coming out video, without enacting it in the mode of non-fiction that coming out videos invariably assume. Put another way, wrapped up in these fictional layers of narration, aesthetic gestures like fictional characters and classical shot-reverse shot editing, the fact that Wynn verbalizes an identity that she did in fact personally identify with at this moment, nonetheless isn't quite imbued with the rhetorical force of a personal confession. This is despite the fact that it's Wynn herself saying these words, which are further confirmed by two other characters who she's also playing. It's clearly true that, as one excellent video essay made about Wynn by Sarah Zedig puts it,
the very nature of Natalie's one-woman, many-characters dialectical style basically makes it impossible for the audience to forget that these are fragments of Natalie Wynn.
Nonetheless, by shifting between different modes of address, Wynn can still choose either to imbue or distance her performance from the assumed appearance of non-fiction so often associated with YouTube, using it to some extent in one video, to a different extent in another. Transtrender's ambiguous but distinct distance from a non-fictional mode remains intact, even despite this video's dramatizing many personal details that would later be confirmed as autobiographical 7 months later. For example, towards the video's end, Justine declares her love for her frenemy Tiffany out of the blue, only to be rejected.
I love you. Okay, well, I'm going to get going now. I have a important date tonight, drinking vodka cranberries and reading YouTube comments by myself, so...
Retrospectively, this seems clearly inspired by something that Wynn later confesses in Shame, that the love that she discovered for her best friend remained unrequited.
I was experiencing an intensity of emotion that has no right to exist outside of 19th century Italian opera. So I confessed my feelings to Joanne, and love confession gone wrong, devastating. She did not reciprocate my feelings.
As we might expect, the similarities between what Justine experiences in Transtrenders and the experiences that Wynn recounts in Shame were noted by fans. On the ContraPoints subreddit, we see commenters writing that, following Shame, Transtrenders now either strikes them as foreshadowing or feels prophetic. Justine's coming out is now described as seeming very real, but also, crucially, that Justine remains, in the words of one commenter, the character that feels closest to the author, to the point I've sometimes not realized that she's been in character for stretches of certain videos. So, while the close similarities between them are acknowledged, a fundamental distinction between Justine and Wynn is still ultimately maintained. Justine is the character closest to Wynn herself of all her characters. It seems clear that what these fans are acknowledging is awareness precisely of the characteristically hybrid act of imagination and belief invited by Autofiction. the author is both herself and a fictional character. So, to wrap things up, precisely because autofiction plays with blurring the boundaries between fiction and non-fiction, its very existence as a coherent concept absolutely depends on the meaningfulness of that boundary in the first place. After all, if every story we told were equally fictional, there'd be no need to distinguish autofiction from more conventional fiction, nor indeed autobiography at all. And this, to me, seems like one unlikely appeal of autofiction as a category. Part of my interest in discussing autofiction on YouTube lies in challenging the blanket postmodern collapsing of distinctions between everyday social performance and fictional performance.
Persona can be incredibly disconnected from your actual person. At that point, it becomes character.
I think we need to maintain those distinctions, partly simply because collapsing them will leave us unable to appreciate the aesthetic complexity of what some YouTubers are doing on the platform.
In this vision ye have witnessed mortal fools upon the screen, fools who do not love themselves, but I am nothing like them.
At the same time, we also need to take the distinction between fiction and non-fiction seriously in order to acknowledge how complex non-fiction performance of the self can often be.
But I think there's definitely a gradient between the ineffable, authentic self and a character that is entirely disconnected from ourselves.
For instance, Wynne has talked about how, before her transition, she began experimenting with different gender presentation in ways that she initially thought of as part of a YouTube persona, before coming to recognize that it was actually a way of expressing her true gender identity.
I started this YouTube channel, and like the persona, I decided, you know what, I'm just doing this channel in drag, basically. It really did give me a way to get more and more like comfortable sort of feeling out my femme self. I guess initially I would kind of play it off almost as a joke or like a part of the
persona,
character. Yeah. But then I kind of realized that like I'm using this persona to be myself.
For artists to blur these distinctions between fiction and non-fiction can be aesthetically exhilarating. But for us to collapse them will leave us unable to fully appreciate the complexities of either fiction or non-fiction on YouTube. I'm going to be exploring more questions like these on this channel in the near future, so please do subscribe if you're interested in these kinds of ideas. I promise that my next video about YouTube won't take me half a decade. Thanks for listening.